So, hey, please forgive me for being emotional. I guess that's also probably what one would expect. So, yeah, we're going to get over that. Family topics for me, again, I'm the least abused, so they were rare, and pretty timid. It hurt the most when the negative feedback came from someone I thought gave a shit about me or believed me about myself, and so for them to give me this feedback or label me or call me names or yell at me or berate me. I mean, that's kind of how I work. Like, I didn't give a shit when my dad yelled in my face or my mom projected all of her shit on me. But when I lived with Cindy, when she was disappointed because I hadn't followed a rule explicitly or communicated properly, that was devastating, because the trust and the earned and the depth built in the relationship was more important to me than, someone just, projecting their own shit on a kid, because she never did that, right? And I think that people should really think about that, you guys, like, especially when you're dealing with kids, this whole yelling and this blame stuff, the shame stuff, and the blowing it up to scare them. I think it backfires more than it doesn't, at least with kids like me, because I understand that that's not about me. That doesn't mean I don't take people's shit on as my own and whatever. But, like, when you have to push past a controlled, mutual respect communication style to, like, a pit bull or chihuahua, I see it as that. And I see it as that because I do that. So I understand it. My dad does it, so I learned it. And so when you do it, I see it. But when you come from a, more controlled perspective of, like, damn, like, I really thought you cared about me enough to not do this, or you cared about our relationship enough to not disrespect it in such a way, mentally manipulating me, is easier. Like, I, again, was raised Catholic, so guilt is going to work better than shame for me. I'll shame myself. You go ahead and guilt me. Let me apply the shame. Don't try to shame me. I won't accept that. Again, I shame myself. So my table topics, again, the main theme was that I refused to accept that I should be there, that I refused to admit to myself and my family why I was there, and I really was a slut, even though I'd only had relations with one person, and those relations were mutually respectful. As a 33-year-old person, I can look back on my first sexual partner and say that, like, it was a very healthy expression of exploration of my sexuality with someone who I had a mutual affection for, and we really cared about each other as much as kids can, but also, especially because of my PTSD, in my experience, it's probably the most real and most attached I ever have been with a person. Growing up, I was most intimately connected with my aunt, and then it would have been my high school boyfriend, and then I don't know who it is since then, right? My best friend in high school, I guess before my high school boyfriend, Paul, but the one that I lived with, and wait till you hear how that ends, you guys. But, so, yeah, since the family school, my peer-on-peer relationships are, all within this, like, parts therapy false persona in which I engage with the world on, in a disingenuine way. And while I can connect, I can't attach. Attachment is a dangerous and negative thing for me. And I understand that that's probably not true, or it's not true, I guess, about humanity in general. But I also do acknowledge that based on my personal experience, it has been true for me. There's a lot of people who are like, well, paranoia is this idea that, despite the contrary evidence, you expect negative things to happen. Fuck you guys. This is based on my personal experience. This kind of fucked up shit happens. Even if they're your relative, they will disown you. Even if they're your parents, They will abandon and commit you to child abuse. You know, even if someone says they love you and that they'll be there for you, they will not. Your entire world can be turned against you. If you haven't lived in a social experiment where everything is an adversarial experience and you are pitted against yourself and everyone's pitted against you, and the whole thing is, what can we do to make you crack open? We need to break you down so that eventually, allegedly, but it never happens, we'll build you back up. That I don't know that you can understand how real of a risk we take when we engage in the outside world, or if we make any level of commitment to an intimate relationship of any kind, any flavor. I'm not just talking about romance by any means. I don't do best friends. That's not a thing I do. Like, I can totally let anybody go. I do have a daughter and a dog, and so my life has become even more complex. But outside of that, that's just a reality for me. And a lot of it comes from having my entire peer force be a police force, and everybody really was out to freaking get me. Table topics were where I was first in life ever called a cunt by any human being, and it was by a grown man. And it's the first time that I experienced this, group attack therapy. I love calling it that. It feels so fun to, use therapy in there, because irony's the name of the episode. No, I'm just kidding. There's no name in the episode, but maybe. So this was fun. And again, mine weren't really anywhere near as bad as other people's. I look forward to hearing Meredith's experiences of hers, because her table topics while I was there were far more traumatic for me than my own. And also this is because I was disassociating, right? So at one point during one of my table topics, and the cunt one, they were like, "What are you thinking?" And I was like, "I'm just spelling out the words you're saying in my head." This was a tool that I'd learned as a young child with my own father, to not cry during, one of these in-your-face screaming sessions by breaking down everything they said and just spelling the words out, So I'm focusing on each letter. I'm focusing on each word. I'm trying not to get, left behind and lost. I got to make sure I keep up with the words, and they're usually very fast, right? So all of my mental activity is going to that. It's not that I don't hear it. I usually retain most of it, but it's more of I can almost, read it in past tense, so the energy isn't with the words. I'm not processing them simultaneously, if that makes any sense at all. And so it's safer for me, and it also keeps me from having an emotional response in the moment, which is the whole point, is to not make whatever it is much worse by letting them find an in that they will continue to exploit. I believe I was totally honest during my experience at the family school. That does not mean that I wasn't a dramatic, freaked out, in shock, 17-year-old girl dealing with a dystopic fairy tale from hell that I'd probably prepped myself with from a very young age based on the books I read and set myself up for by my suicide attempt, which, kind of gave my parents some validity for stuff like this, or, yada yada. I was really honest. You have to do a lot of AA work, including a fourth step where you literally write out every little thing that you can remember ever doing wrong, including mathematically calculating the amount of times you'd had sex, which was really fun, because even though I only had one partner, we were horny little teenagers, right? So they basically were like, well, how many times did you hang out times how many times, whatever, some mathematical equation for what a whore I am, which, pause, aren't we just fundamentally confused and concerned about such a preoccupation with prepubescent and teenage sexual experiences, including masturbation and wet dreams, and that being facilitated by adults with children and then shared? That's right though, and especially because there were members of the faculty that were self-proclaimed, like they admitted it to us during their 10th step, I believe is story time, or it was just common knowledge, were sex addicts, but usually, like, there were at least 2 to 3 that had been child predators, that had sex with children our ages, and including one that allegedly the reason he was kicked out of his program, Eastridge, was because he'd impregnated a 15-year-old girl at Eastridge. So, I think they got married or whatever, so that's fine, right? But, this was a regular part of it, like write down all your partners mathematically, put it all out. Your 4th step was never good enough, so you had to do it multiple times. Every piece of candy you stole, try to remember all the times that you hit your sister, all the lies you told, any drug use, obviously, like that should just be assumed, right? And all that jazz. And of course, mine wasn't going to be good enough, because, I really don't think it paled in comparison to the narrative they were trying to get me to accept about myself. So it just was never going to be good enough. But even at my table topics, all these interactions, I'm being totally honest. So Meredith, one of her table topics, I'm just going to touch on it because I'm hoping that she'll cover it at length in her story. We're in family 3 together, so we're together all the time. Like, we may have different classes, but we eat all our meals together. All of our weekend stuff, unless one of us is on work sanction or whatever, is spent together. The holidays, we're there for the holidays, so you're off for classes for the holidays and all these weird, social therapy games then, and we live in the same trailer and sleep together, all this stuff. So Meredith, who I had a particular affection for because she was a genuine human being, and they were a rarity in this, like, cool age, quench your thirst on, like, authority experiment. And she had a table topic that was particularly disturbing around I don't even want to give it I don't know what she wants to say about it. But anyways, this table topic was about something that, and I wish I hadn't said it was Meredith, because then I could tell you, but just, like, not name her. Damn it. Anyways, she was a virgin at the school, but it was still about, her, like, sex life, which was totally insane. Number one, it just was not fucking true. So it didn't matter if you were standing on a corner hooking for drugs in New York City, or if you were genuinely, like, a 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old virgin. You had a sex problem. So, and if you didn't have any experience with alcohol or drugs, you had a drug problem. You just thankfully had been sent, to the family school prior to that expressing itself in your experience. So watching Meredith, this sweet, joyful, beautiful, she's a frickin' virgin, but we're still gonna, like, cause in the first episode that we had together, she was like, her table topics weren't about her sex life. And I'm like, that's fucking bullshit. Everybody had table topic, or at least the girls. Mostly just the girls. The only boys' sex life conversations I ever remember were when they had, been boys that had raped their sisters. And that was part of what was going on. So those are the only ones, or raped someone. That was it. Other words, they really were not preoccupied with male sexual behavior. But they really were with the females. And, I really think it comes from this really perverted perspective. And for me, oftentimes when there was slut shaming or, slut like projection, especially against these virgins, which this happened with Meredith wasn't the only sweet, innocent little virgin that was put on trial for being a sacred whore. Like, they all were, at least the ones that I saw. So I loved to look back and, watch the female staff members, because initially, the first time this ever happened to me, and I think Meredith was the first time, and so that's what's so special, because, she actually isn't a slut, so, like, you can't even, You know, like, some of these girls, like, they could eventually get them to the point where they're like, yeah, like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm such a slut. This is why nobody loves me. This is why my parents don't love me. This is why I hate myself shit. Even if it wasn't true for them, you know, to go after Meredith and these perspectives was just, like, totally fucking insane. That it was the girls that we, like, dormed with, these girls that we live with and spend all of our time with. You know, you talk about fucking mean girls, you guys. Well, I'm talking putting some, pretty blonde mean girls in this, like, pretty demonic school in the mountains where it's like, hey, you don't like fat girls? Okay, well, go after this one and just make up whatever the fuck you want. Nobody's gonna fact check anybody. You can't, you know, you can't, like, if somebody called you out, like, with Meredith, they'd called her out for eating granola bars, like, stealing granola bars is something I remember. And I need to talk to her more about that because I didn't know that she was genuinely innocent. Damn, until we had our first episode and she told me no, that she hadn't taken the granola bars. I think they, like, legit planted the evidence eventually because she had multiple topics about she was stealing apples, you know, because she wasn't allowed to have a snack at, like, the end of the day. At the end of the day, you do your homework, you meet with your sponsor, you do your AA work. There's a snack bowl of fruit and a snack bowl of granola bars, and most kids aren't allowed to have the fucking granola bars, but, you know, if you're not on any sanctions or whatever, then you can, and it's incredibly, incredibly thrilling. Like, I lived my day for these awful, disgusting, you know, Quaker Oats, I think they were, like, Rice Krispie with chocolate chips, bittersweet in them. They were my life. But, you know, otherwise, I was more than happy to fight someone for an orange, right? So, not that you could fight anybody, but you know what I mean. So they had accused her of stealing the granola bars, and I genuinely, for 15 years, still believed it was true, because she took it for the granola bars. She never said, I don't think she admitted to it, but I do believe that there were wrappers found up in our dorm that were attributed to Meredith, and so I wonder if those fucking bitches planted it on her. You know, if they're gonna come at her for some, like, slut-shaming projection shit when she's, like, this goody two-shoes innocent virgin, like, whose only experience, I imagine, as a high school girl, like, having crushes and shit, is in this, like, totally psyched out, like, you know, experiment where she's not even allowed to, like, make eye contact with half of these guys, definitely not allowed to touch them, definitely wasn't going to get away with flirt. If I wasn't going to get away with trying to talk to a safe person at lunch, then Meredith, with her, like, frickin' dimples, was not going to get away with smile talking at guys for very long, if it was, you know, misconstrued as flirtation. And, I mean, she got called out for flirting with people anyways, like, that, these people are crazy. So, and this stuff happening, I was in shock. I was in shock that these adult females did absolutely nothing for the most part, although, as Meredith touched on in the first episode, we did have Pastor Pam, and there were times, and sometimes especially with these, that she would focus her attention when these females would be targeted for this kind of treatment, and so, you know, there was a little bit of that, but on the grand scale, these women, and, you know, they were, like, highly educated as a majority, but some of them were, you know, I respected a couple of the women's staff there, and I don't know what the hell was going through their heads. I'm not sure if they'd been around this for long enough to be desensitized and it really wasn't a big deal, or this wasn't the worst they'd seen, or if any of them were fully cognizant of the, like, the evil aspects of the treatment here and how detrimental they were, but they stayed to be that for the children. You know, I could see it as, like, a heroic path to be that one person that these kids can go to, because it makes the difference. I assure you that, if I did not have a few people who saw me through it finally, and not that it started out this way, although, you know, earlier I mentioned Lisa, I held on to her kindness for months until I was able to get a little bit of kindness from someone else who finally believed me. But, you know, these adults are programmed to treat these children like everything they say is a lie and a manipulation, and I like that's the basis of their identity, right? So for these women to allow these young women to be, and I mean this, traumatized by this kind of public mockery and, like, scarlet letter ass shit. I don't know. And not calling them out as being, like, anti-feminists. Not that I label myself that anyways, right? I'm not into labels at all. But, it's crazy. And especially if they were on that heroic path, like we just discussed, like, wow. Like, thank you for being there. I guess you did all you could, right? And this was one of those things, like this moment, you know, with this specific topic that was of a very personal nature with Meredith, where no one was going to stop it. And I just remember the most I could do was make eye contact with her and just, you know, just like, don't look at them, like, I'm looking at you, you know? And I've seen kids do that. This, like, kind of, team dissociation kind of a thing. Like, hold up, kid, like, let's just bail out of this together right now because this is too much. And obviously, if it's not obvious through my lack of control of tone, these have long-term effects on human beings. I'm far more traumatized by those moments with my friend standing up there in front of the mob and not being able to do anything or being unwilling to do anything. I'm more affected by my powerlessness versus, like, my lack of devotion to purpose and her and advocacy and living in truth because of stuff I witnessed happen to other people than I am the pussy-ass games they tried to play with me. But pussy-ass games they sure did play. And so they tried to break me. This was going to be a delicate road to walk because I only had a few months before I turned 18. So they have to get me to a place where I am either actually mandated to stay or I am voluntarily willing to stay in a few short months. And so I go to the school in late August, late September, I don't even know, of 2003, and my birthday is going to be April 29th, 1986. So it's tricky. Like, they can't push me too hard, not fast enough, because I may not recover from being resentful and obstinate by the time I turn 18. And they also kind of want to, like, ease me in so that, like, I don't think it's so bad. And we'll talk about how bad it was, but, like, honestly, like, on, like, the night of my 18th birthday, the eve of my 18th birthday, I don't want to say I was considering staying, because that's, like, hard to say and horrifying, but I allowed that line of debate of, like, is it really so bad? And, like, I could graduate and then my parents would help me pay for college, and I was bonded to Meredith and to Felicia and to some other people, and I didn't want to leave them. There's such a thing like survivor's guilt, and we've got it on a few levels. So for people who walked or ran away or came out with enough resilience or resources to feel okay, there's a survivor's guilt for those who didn't come out okay or didn't come out at all or bailed out. And so and this is all a testament to their excellent brainwashing and reprogramming, because even though I, on a conscious and deliberate level, was rejecting the program and rejecting all of this and really just trying to keep myself sane, and I have like a renewed experience with like the Christian religion, which from like middle school till now, I'd kind of thrown out Christ with the bathwater and was, just really agnostic, and really commit to, well, I'll write about this when I leave, and this is such an opportunity, like, how many people are going to experience this, right? So, lucky you read all those books, and now you get your first-hand experience. You wanted it, right? There's a lot that goes in, and these tactics, like, really, really work. So, in spite of all of that, some of the stuff that they tried to do, while I didn't think it worked there, totally did. Like, one of the things is that you're on blackout in bathroom stalls. You can't talk to each other when you're in bathroom stalls in the school. And I was on blackout in bathroom stalls until my mid-20s. Literally, like, I was in a bathroom, and my girlfriend was talking to me about, these roller derby tryouts that we just found out about, and if I wanted to go do them, like, if I was really going to do it, and I didn't hear her, and when we were washing our hands, she's like, what the fuck, like, I feel like you always do this to me, like, what's going on? And I genuinely blacked out everything that she had said to me, and it was really kind of, jolting at that point, for me to realize that, and I kind of just, like, still at that point in my mid-20s, decided to, like, pass it off as a one-off. Like, I was still referring to the family school as my boarding school, because I didn't want myself or others to perceive me as a troubled teen, or as broken, or deranged, or dangerous, or any of the negative aspects or implications of the image they wanted me to create for myself there, that I apparently had started to believe, and, so, but I had a pretty typical, I guess, sanction track. Obviously everyone's on 6-month blackout initially. I'm in the corner for a while, and then I go on work sanction. The corner's great. It's hard on me mentally, for the isolation, and it's just like, time drags when you are literally sitting in a corner, and so that was pretty harsh, but whatever, it's not a big deal, like, it doesn't factor into my, trauma, and then, they put me on work sanction, because, again, I continued to refuse to admit why I was there, why I needed to be there, and what my problems were. And I was on work sanction in December, I believe. It was the middle of the blizzards. We're in the Catskill Mountains of New York, and we are shoveling snow from one, I think it was like a soccer field. I don't know. I've never really played the sports there. I left in the spring. So we're shoveling all day from one field to another, and it's just, like, ridiculous. And the fields are, like, it's all filling up as you're shoveling it, because, I mean, if you're from, like, New England or, upstate New York is, like, really intense blizzard country, and we're in the mountains, right? So it physically hurts. It's a lot of physical exhaustion. You're not adequately clothed. Our shoes were not water resistant, so, like, the kids did get frostbite, on work sanction, and also running away in the winter, especially if they ran away with no shoes, damn it. That's gotta, I know that's kind of funny, but it's also a testament to how badly somebody needed to escape, right? And, work sanction, I also got to, like, work in the laundry room with, like, this woman who'd escaped Russia when it was really bad, and so that was really awesome. It was really warm in the laundry room, and we just did laundry all day, and I don't think you were supposed to be off blackouts on work sanction, right? But, in the laundry room to an extent, and with Ruben, who was a photographer from Puerto Rico, they let some of us off blackouts with each other. And now some people who were really afraid of getting in trouble, wouldn't participate in that. But I was off blackout with a few people I should have been on blackout with during work sanctions, sometimes in certain work sanctions. And was totally aware that wasn't allowed. And so that was really great. Loved laundry. And so I think that's why I don't know how long I stayed on work sanction. It didn't feel like very long at all. But it was a delight, and they took me off because these sanctions, especially the ones where I'm isolated from my peer groups, are like totally backfiring on them, because for me, the worst part is the peer shit. Like, I don't want to deal with that. And so to allow me to sit in a corner alone, or to be on work sanction with a bunch of other kids that are also being targeted, so I'm having like this sense of like camaraderie, even if these relationships are completely in my mind because we're never allowed to speak a single word to each other, whatever, that's way better than constantly being at risk around these peer police and being subject to their constant attack therapy and these constant manipulative games and gaslighting and all this jazz. And I was totally, again, like I said, I was totally honest. So when they would call me up at the table and ask me how work sanction's going, I'm going to tell them the truth, like, honestly. If honesty wasn't a big part of, like, my rebellion of, like, see, I really am, like, I do understand integrity and fortitude and all this shit, I wish I'd just been like, oh my god, work sanction sucks, like, so that I could have stayed on it, for much longer. But, eventually I was taken off work sanction, and it really wasn't very long indeed. So, and I started to put myself on sanctions, again, this is part of my rebellion is, like, I don't give a fuck about your sanctions. Like, I don't want to talk to anybody. So I put myself on blackout with boys because I was sick as fuck of being called out for flirting with these guys that, like, they fucking wish. Do you know what I mean? Like, you wish I was flirting with you. Like, I already told all of you that I have a boyfriend and that I'm staying loyal. But even if I didn't, you are not the one. Now, the even if I didn't, you are the one, did exist for me at the school. And his aspect of his story, my story, is one that I'm very uncomfortable telling. It's one that I have talked with a lot of other survivors from my school about. It feels like this is a thing with witness syndrome. Telling other people's stories is so inappropriate on one level. But as it relates to our own experience and the overall narrative, I don't feel that it's disrespectful because we have to, like, see the full picture of all the characters on the stage at the time and the many different ways that this can unfold. And I really, really hope that if I did name you, that you aren't offended by it. I don't intend to name people that I criticize, because I don't think it's fair to call someone out unless they were literally here to have a conversation about it. But, if I am naming you, it's because I'm thanking you and I won't be using your last name, and I hope that that's okay. I hope that doesn't cross a line. With Tom's, walk-on part in my story, he isn't here to call up and ask him what happened and talk about this with him, because he died at the school, and we were all there for that. And that's why it's uncomfortable, because it feels like a big part of the bleeding heart, like, wha-pow in your face consequences of these situations is somebody else's story. But if I had died at the school, I wouldn't be here to tell it. And I don't think that blaming him and then forgetting him is the appropriate way to prevent what happened or to honor this human being. Because so there was this guy that showed up at the school, and I noticed him at, roundup before we all went back to our families the first time he showed up. And I noticed him because he was pretty tall, and he fit my, exact kind of guy I'm attracted to at the time, which is super Irish looking. He's wearing the ski jacket I've always wanted, and you notice the new kid. You always notice the new kid. It's not the biggest school. I think there are less than 300 kids there, right? So you notice everybody. So remember, I have this boyfriend who is like my main, this is how I'm sustaining my sanity, is I've only got a few months. I got here in September 2003. I'm getting out in April 2004, at the end of April. So we can power through this, you guys. We're just like focusing on when we get out, when we're back with our boyfriend, back with our friends. I'm going to be graduating high school, going to college. Like, it's all going to be good. So for me, and especially with my original Catholic upbringing, where, you know, if you do it in your mind, it's as if you did it in real life. Lusting is cheating, it's adultery. And then also the school, it's a negative contract. If you're lusting after someone in your mind and blah, blah, blah. So, and in tone with Miranda's like radical honesty, like I really am working the program. I'm really a totally open, honest person. I told my sponsor, I told her that I was, you know, using this attractive guy, you know, like that middle school, high school experience where you see the cute guy in the hall and you get the endorphins and the butterflies and you feel good. And so I told her that, and, you know, all of my guilt because in my mind I'm cheating on my boyfriend. It's not like, I'm literally not, I promise, having sex fantasies with this guy. I'm not having wet dreams. There's obviously no way anybody's masturbating in the school, right? So there's none of that, but it's just the fact that I'm getting these endorphins and looking at this guy, and I'm deliberately choosing to look at him as he goes by me, right? Like, because I could look away. He's on blackout with me anyways, right? He's on 6-month blackout. We're not in the same family. I'm only like seeing him in the halls, but I am deliberately choosing to seek him out in the halls and out. House topics. I'm not sure if he was even there for one, but definitely all of roundups and going through the halls and whatnot. So I admitted to this. This is something now that I'm having to bring up on my nightly or whatever inventories, where I'm having to say whether or not, you know, like I indulged in this and looked at Tom or whatever. And so, yeah. So I do get to this point though, where I'm like, you know what, like, fuck it. Like, I'm not even, I can't even talk to him. So it's kind of on this like really poetic level of, it's not like I want to replace my boyfriend with him. I love Max, but like, this is like a seriously hardcore situation we're in. I'm not trying to, like, people bond with each other when they can actually speak with each other in these situations, but don't like overstep a line anyways. Like, maybe, you know, and for the record, I don't exist to him at all. I don't think we ever made eye contact. Pretty sure I'd remember that, you know, because it was a big deal for me. So, yeah, I'm like, okay, I'm just going to do this. I'm just going to, like, look at this guy all the time when I can and feel good for a few minutes. And that's who he was to me. And then one morning we're having breakfast, and, you know, a lot of these memories, especially, like, the really intense ones with all the somatic elements to them, the before and afters, and when they fall along the chronological timeline, are kind of hard to pinpoint. The best way to do it is to cross-reference it with other survivors that were there. But I am really, prior to this podcast, I wasn't necessarily trying to remember the stuff I didn't remember. I was trying to deal with the shit I already did remember. And also, like, I really am big into placebo and groupthink, and I don't want to construct memories that aren't real or agree to memories that aren't real. Not that that has actually happened. In my opinion, the stuff that I remembered that I hadn't remembered, everybody agrees is the reality. Like, we're talking like the vitamins and shit that I genuinely didn't remember. But I do now, and I believe that that's a genuine, whatever, we're, you know, going off track. So I don't remember where I am initially. We are having breakfast, finishing up breakfast, ready to go to first period. I'm not sure if I'm still sitting at the table, but we all heard it. The family's only 2 stories, and Tom had dove off the 2nd story where his family was and landed in the grass in front of our family. I didn't see him do it. I have friends, unfortunately, who did. And, you know, I hope we can all understand that that's something that, especially when you witness any of it firsthand, has long-term effects. None of them have forgotten it. It's significant to all of them. And 2 men left our family immediately, Angelo and Sid. And at this point, pretty quickly after, I'm in the hallway. So the way that these kinds of trauma memories work, aside from not being able to like really chronologically place it, is that time is fucking irrelevant, and I process a lot in this 30 seconds to 5 minutes. I have no idea how long I was out there. I find it very hard to believe that I was out there for 5 whole minutes, because very quickly, or at least it seems so, they were rushing everyone out of the families into the school, either at holding areas or at their usually your first period class, and they held them there until we ended up going to chapel to talk about what had happened, which was, we'll get there. So I am standing in the hallway, at the counter, peering out of the windows. The windows stretch the whole way through this hallway, and the door is right there, and Tom isn't that far from it, and he is still alive. He is thrashing. I don't know if he's seizuring. I don't know if it's spasms. I don't know if he's just trying to get up and he can't, but I can hear and see him choking on his blood. And I can see Angelo, who I previously described. He's a 6'7", maybe big, old biker dude, who was our family pit bull and one of the main guys used to physically restrain and tackle kids at the school. And now this big man is standing over this young man, and he isn't this authoritative figure anymore. This is, I'm processing the humanity of this adult bully. He's in complete and utter shock. He has no idea how to process or handle this, or even how to start. And I guess there's an element of me pitying him or feeling compassion for him, which is, jarring or unnerving for me, because I've only felt contempt for this person, and so I'm accepting his humanity. And I'm a teenager, so these are things. These are big things. And then the rest of it is very uncomfortable for me. Let me light up another cigarette, because I feel like it illustrates the worst in me. So psychologically, from a very impersonal, objective viewpoint, I can also see myself as a human. And it's a very complex internal processing to like unwind. But if I look at it, objectively, it's interesting, and I don't hate myself, right? But I don't know that I need you to understand how this isn't horrible, and this is just like a very normal human psychological experience, especially in the situation that we're in. I need me to, so it's stuff I work on for me, but I'm a really self-deprecatingly honest person, because I just really enjoy that about the human experience, and so I'm gonna try to unwrap it. So on one end, because I have this one-sided negative contract with this beautiful, sensitive boy who doesn't know I exist, I am, initially being like, did my negative contract contribute to his ill fate? Did my sponsor tell his sponsor? Who cares, right? So there's that. Because of my own suicidality, with the difference being that I knew I only had a few months, I had a support system, best friends, and a boyfriend that I really wanted to get back to. So I think that was the big difference. I am not sure, because if you know the difference between jealousy and envy, jealousy being, I wish I had that too, and envy being, I wish you didn't. I'm not sure which it is with him, but I just, he had the wherewithal, or there's like no positive way to put it, but like there's a part of me that wished I had it in me to kill myself. But I had stuff to still live for outside of this experience, and it was manageable. But I don't know also if I thought that he was going to get to the hospital and then convince his parents to let him out because it was so horrible and tell them the truth, or if I genuinely understood that death might be the price of freedom and I thought that it was valid. I don't know. Like I said earlier, I do believe that a majority of the human beings I've encountered in this life would choose suicide if placed in these programs, especially as an adult. Especially if you are an adult and you don't have control over your environment. And then can you imagine being a traumatized or depressed or, especially sensitive teenager when you don't have a fully developed prefrontal cortex and, dealing with the suicidality and then this extreme trauma from, because Tom, allegedly, according to his parents, was depressive and had a suicidality issue and, was a musical sensitive kind of a guy. So you take someone who's already struggling with emotional instability and these issues, which usually, unless it's a chemical imbalance, are born from some sort of trauma, even if it's as benign seeming as not having your emotional needs met in early childhood and feeling completely misunderstood and mislabeled and cast out of society. Even if it's just that, then you put them in this social experiment that is literally constructed upon breaking down this person, getting them to admit that they're worthless and powerless and a piece of shit and everything about them needs to change. If you mentally and emotionally and verbally abuse someone who is already doing that to themselves, then like it's just, it's like the Pygmalion effect. If you treat someone as if they can be better, sometimes they become better. My Fair Lady, like, she spoke and acted like she was out of her class, so people treated her like she was from that superior class. There's freaking social psychology science about this, so let's Google the Pygmalion effect. It works the other way around as well. If you continue to treat people as if they're worthless and can't get better and don't deserve something, unfortunately, especially if it's the entirety of their society or their nuclear family or their school or their religion or whatever it may be, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's a collective social self-fulfilling prophecy. And that's really scary shit. And to a certain extent, these programs are aware of that because, there's social science behind all of these games they're playing. So someone at some level understood it to the detriment as well. So another big aspect is on an impersonal level. I already mentioned that the bystander effect is really hard for me personally, and especially so in this case. I had already wanted to connect personally with this person, even though I wasn't going to do it because I thought he was cute. And real fun fact, this is a permanent thing for me. I will avoid people that I find attractive, that I'm attracted to. All of my relationships since the family school have been, other than the one directly after, which was, specifically meant to be like dysfunctional. They've all been friends I've had long term who either themselves or utilizing peer pressure convinced me that I was like already dating them and we should just do it. Literally. So there's that. I wanted to connect with this person, and on an impersonal level, I knew that this person deserved to have someone connect with them. The door was right there. And the most important thing I could have done, probably, in my entire life was not be a selfish, fear-based bitch, and I was afraid of getting mandated at the school. That's it. I was just afraid of, by comparison, check out The Tower. It's a documentary about the Bell Tower shootings at, I think it was the University of Austin or State of, whatever, it's a school. And there's a woman, Rita Starchild, or Rita Star, whatever. She's a redhead, and it's a beautiful film. Please watch it. And she is who I want to be. And up until this point, with the really superficial levels of injustice that I'd experienced outside of the school in my real life, I had been, in my own mind, the kind of person to stand up and not stay quiet. And people who stood by and watched injustice, and especially watching people be unfairly treated publicly shamed, publicly abused psychologically, verbally, or otherwise, I thought I was that kind of hero for myself, even if I had to, push myself and puff my chest out and be kind of an asshole to stand up and say something, that's who I thought I was. And many times during my experience at the family school, and this is one of the most detrimental psychological long-term effects, is that I was not that person. In The Tower, Rita runs into the middle of a courtyard under gunfire to emotionally support another peer who was shot and couldn't move. She risked her physical safety to be there for somebody because it was the right thing to do. And it might have been the last bit of human kindness that person ever experienced. And for the rest of my life, this is the moment I have to make up for. And I know that I don't mean shit to Tom, and his death is not about me. But the way that I responded is about me. And it tells me a lot about myself that I'm very uncomfortable with. And yeah, so I didn't go out that door, and I just stood there and I watched him, and I processed all this, and 5 different strains of consciousness at once, and disassociated, but I didn't. I was so fucking present in that moment that I'm still there. And pretty quickly they rushed us all out back to the school, to school. It was going to be first period, and I don't know if they held us there and immediately took us to chapel, or if chapel was at the end of the day. Nobody talked about it. Nobody was allowed to talk about it or allude to it. And in chapel that day, they informed us that Tom had died either on the care flight or, been pronounced dead when he arrived at the hospital. And then his parents, in a few days' time, it felt like, came to the school. And there are people who can tell some of these stories better because they directly interacted with them. I didn't, obviously. They came to the school to see where he'd been and thank everybody for trying to save their son because, he couldn't be saved. And, surreal. They showed him where he died, and, these kids showing these parents where their son, choked to death on his own blood after he had dove only one story from the ground, and for the narrative to be because it, just like the New York Times article about, there was a New York Times article about us a few years ago, which unfortunately derailed into, It makes sense that these kids have a really high death rate and a really high suicide rate because they were disturbed and troubled before they went to the program. So, how can you, suggest causation? And I don't know that people are. I think people are suggesting a correlation between re-traumatizing and attacking vulnerable youth who are already declared emotionally vulnerable. And I think that's what it's about. And I'm not trying to blame the school on Tom, but I didn't know him. I don't know his story. I don't, but I do know that this experience made people who weren't suicidal anyways, like myself and apparently, allegedly, Tom, consider it, and I considered it there a few times. But I had something to live for, and if I'd failed, I would have been mandated, and I think that I think that they hold a level of responsibility. And I feel that Tom was given an extreme disservice to have his family manipulated into accepting that they did everything for their son and that these people did everything for their son and that, the inevitable happened anyways, when the reality is, and I don't mean if any of them hear about this statement, which who cares, I'm not relevant, right? But the reality is we don't know if their son would be alive today if he had not been sent to an abusive, cult-based, brainwashing, reprogramming experiment while at the climax of his own genuine, emotional turmoil. We could assume possibly that had he been sent to a genuine therapeutic environment which supported his introspection and self-healing and learning positive tools, coping mechanisms, and addressing shit and maybe getting some family therapy, it's possible that he would still be alive, right? And I feel like all the survivors that I've spoken with personally have their own witnessing a suicide at their own program. And if you look at the list, it's long. And so these aren't one-offs. These aren't, some sort of collateral damage that doesn't even amount to anything. Firstly, one is enough. But you've got a list of people who killed themselves at programs, let alone an incredible list, highly beyond the average statistic of people who have killed themselves since the programs. And I'm sorry, but there is a correlation factor here with abusing children in institutions who are, especially if they were already emotionally sensitive, vulnerable, or traumatized. And for everyone who had to witness this happen to him, this isn't Tom traumatizing us with his suicide. This is us being traumatized by the death of a peer, and then having that death not only wiped under the rugs, no therapy, no addressing the potential trauma. When I was in my regular high school at Mercy, one of our classmates tragically died. There was therapy offered at school. It was there was open grieving. It was covered in classes. People were brought in from the outside, and I'm not saying that they did the best job. I think they did a fair enough job. Had I been much closer to her, perhaps I wouldn't agree, right? That's all based on perception. But they addressed it. Our school, we were not allowed to talk about Tom. We weren't allowed to pause walking by where he died. We were on blackout with this situation. It was acknowledged what happened. His family came and we all offered them our condolences and said nice things about him while he was there. And, it was all a show. It was a charade. And it's incredibly disrespectful to who this person was, who he could have been, and what he endured, that in some way, to some extent, if not causation, which it very well could have been, in direct correlation caused his death. And, you know, we carry him, but I don't think it's usually enough. I think that from my solo experience, I feel like obviously it can't be enough, but when I speak with people like one of my house brothers, and he tells me how watching this happen, is still relevant psychologically to him today. I mean, maybe there is something to be said for us carrying him with us, but I think we all have our Tom, and I think that their truth needs to be told, and, there are plenty of deaths that are not caused by our own hands in these programs, but I think that, completely disregarding suicide, because it's at the hands of the victim, so there is no victim, and especially to construe it as a crime, how does that help us address our shit as a society and evolve forward? It genuinely doesn't. And so for survivors who are capable of speaking out and advocating, and potentially assisting in some sort of reform and justice, I think that we do have an obligation when we're ready and it's safe for us to come forward and handle this shit. Because there are children in these programs right now who are going through worse than we went through or the same, and we know what happens to them in the programs and after the programs. So, being that was some pretty heavy subject matter, maybe we should, switch vibe. Other words, this could just be, a really, that vibe Miranda, soapbox thread. And I'm pretty sure I've spent a lot of my time covering this stuff, and I'm sure that this is going to be, a multi-seating listening. I almost said viewing, but we're not doing that. Of this anyways. So, I did briefly touch upon, and let's go back to maybe some of the lighter aspects in the darkness. So, lighten another one up. So, something that we had were staff members who, especially for me, once they actually believed my narrative of myself to a certain extent, or stopped treating me like a master manipulator, these weren't direct, oh my God, I believe you, you shouldn't be here, are you okay things, but these were more along the lines of just a very whatever support. And so these relationships, one of which being with the nurse for me, another with Pastor Pam, and another with my sponsor, those were pretty much it other than Ruben, were really, really paramount to the stability of my sanity. We also had moments which were profound for me and some other people, like the Aurora Borealis showed up in the middle of winter, and thankfully, for whatever reason, someone had convinced everybody that we deserved to, or we didn't deserve anything, right? But, it would be educationally beneficial if the kids could, come out and stand in the freezing cold for a minute and check out the Aurora Borealis. And that was another absolutely gorgeous time standing still moment in the Catskill Mountains and in the climax of this, horrific nightmare. So we had that. And then also for me on a spiritual level, a lot of walking to chapel in the pitch black in these mountains, and being able to see the sky. And I'm a very nature-based person in my spirituality. I'm a huge hiker, or it was, because I live in Texas and there's nothing to hike here. But that was kind of my jazz. So I started to have a more personal relationship with God, because I needed this higher power. They're preaching the higher power in AA, right? So it's cool. To walk through this with me. And thankfully that does happen. And so it gives me a lot of fortitude. I also have other students that step forward as emotional support, at times most needed. So I didn't have any contact with my parents during my stay at the family school except for one time. And so I think this was pretty close to when my birthday was, and this was an attempt to convince me to stay at the school until I graduated the program, but apparently that was, as it was relayed to me in this meeting, was going to mean that I had to stay past when I would graduate regular high school. So I'm a senior, I'm supposed to graduate, that summer, but this would keep me there until the winter and possibly the next spring, which was something I was totally not fucking down for, right? If I just had to, talk maybe an additional 6 months of the program, and then I could leave maybe my parents who, at this point, pay for college fuckers, if that was on the table, then it was more of something we could have discussed, but me staying for another year or more was just so not going to happen, especially with the way things have been going. So leading up to this one meeting that I have with my family, I have to finalize my 4th step. And so again, my 4th step is going to cover every bad thing I've ever done. It's going to include all of the sexual stuff I've done, anything about masturbating. This is a really personal thing. This is something that I'm having to go over with adults for couple weeks until they agree it's good. Male staff are reading these things, and I'm having, I had a male staff have me in a room alone with him where he was like, I called your father and he gave me permission to basically waterboard, drown me in whiskey, until I got so blackout drunk that I realized I didn't want to be an alcoholic. And I'm like, dude, firstly, I totally believed that conversation had happened with my dad. But also, I'm not a fucking alcoholic. So that'd be really scary. I hope that doesn't happen. A lot of weird shit. So I have to get in this room with my parents and a couple staff members, and I'm not sure if my sister was in the room for my 4th step, but I had to straight up tell them everything. And so, I'm a 17-year-old girl, and they know most of this because I wasn't very sneaky, so I've been busted for most of the shit on this list. But there are some things that they do not know, especially of a sexual nature, and I never wanted to talk to my parents about this stuff, and then to do it in this bleached out white, very institutionalized room with this staff member who's not even in my family, and I've only spoken with him a couple times, where he was extremely aggressive, and some other adults. It was just it was ugh. But you know what? I did it, and I powered through it, and I was totally open and honest, and and it wasn't good enough, of course, and I told, they laid it out, the whole year, blah, shit. At this point, my sister's back in the room, and then I'm like, well, no, I'm going back to my life. I'm gonna go, live with Paul and Cindy, and graduate high school, and be with my boyfriend and shit. And so at this point, I think our meeting probably got cut a little bit short, because at this point, my teenage sister is asked to relay information to me that she has, because apparently she's going to the high school that I used to go to. We didn't go there at the same time at this point. I'd been she's 3 years younger than me, so we hadn't been in high school at the same time. And my boyfriend has left his boys' school. I went to the girls' school, he went to the boys' school, and he's now in the public school as well, and he's dating someone. So he has moved on. This triggers, and you gotta just believe me, I know that this all sounds really silly, but I was a teenage girl. This was I loved him, and I had been using him, smelling his shirt every night, practicing his phone number when I went to bed, just in case I ran and I found a payphone and I called him and he found, I still know his high school number because I memorized it, forever. This was really big. And even if it wasn't him and it was something else, I was using it to stabilize my sanity. And so the ground gets ripped out from underneath me, and I have a genuine fucking nervous breakdown. So as, trivial as this may seem to all of you adults listening, this little teenage blah, 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 it doesn't matter, because it was real to me as a teenager. And honestly, when I still think back on it, it's fucking horrifying. It's one of those out of body, but also somatic memories that I'm afraid I'll just get trapped in again. So I don't even remember my feet as I glided in a, avalanche of a downfall, falling through the floor. from that room, and I didn't see my family again until long after I'd left the school. And I go to the locker rooms, and I'm having a full-fledged nervous breakdown. I can't control my body. I'm really not in my body. And thankfully, my sponsor was around, and so she goes and gets this other girl who's been very kind to me, who they don't really let me hang out with, because if you're kind to each other, they don't let you do that, but they let her off blackout with me, and, God, I wish I could contact her. So these beautiful moments, this teenage girl, she gets me out of the bathroom stall, and they don't let us touch each other, obviously, but they did this time, and she just, physically and emotionally and mentally supported me through this, because I didn't have any ground to stand on anymore. And they finally broke me, I guess, to a certain extent. Like I said, I'd never really drink the Kool-Aid, but this beautiful, beautiful girl, and from this point on for a while, I am, a emotional wreck. I don't even know if I can go live with Cindy and Paul, they I had no contact with them. I didn't know if I had to stay at the school, if I had anywhere else to go, and not having this, person that I'm expecting to reunite with is obviously, my motivators are down, and so it's just, it threw me for a loop, and it psychologically unhinges me enough for me to be a little bit more malleable. And also, this is the time period where everyone's talking about, me just, bawling my eyes out while cleaning, mopping the hallways alone, because, you can't show it around them. But luckily for me, thank fucking God, man, one of my, duties after dinner was to sweep and mop out the hallway in front of Family 3. And so I'm out there alone, and I would just bawl my little eyes out and just let all of that emotional shit out. And, if anybody had been going in and out of the families at that point, which was rare, right, because you don't go anywhere alone, and people aren't moving around once they're in their families for the night, people would witness this behavior from me. So I'm a little bit more malleable, because it's very possible that I'm staying at the school. And at this point, again, another huge, very divine intervention-y experience falls into my lap. So, I do believe on a really, really, I really believe that I live a, blessed, maybe not charmed, but blessed life, because in my darkest experiences is when I am, or just maybe that's the way it is, maybe you're just more aware of the light in the darkness, maybe that's just how it is. So, my parents, not wanting to fork over the $40,000 a year tuition at the family school, had utilized this trajectory that my mother had started building in middle school of my special needs to sue the city of Middletown, Connecticut, and their school system, and get them to pay for the family school based on this special needs jazz. So the way a lot of kids' tuition got paid, especially for non-wealthy parents, was that if the school system didn't offer adequate educational options for those special needs, then legally they would need to provide an alternative, which could be one of these therapeutic boarding homes. So that's what was happening. And so I didn't know this, but I find out, I don't know when I find out, but it triggers in my reality in that these two people come to the family school to give me an IQ test to see what's up with this special needs shit. And then they're also counselors, so aside from the IQ test, they're also interviewing with me and trying to figure out where I'm at with all that jazz. And they have access to my medical records from when I was in the mental hospital after my suicide attempt, and I think they had access, well, they do later have access to my actual therapist in Connecticut. So the best part, and love it, the best part is that I actually happen to know these two people. Because these are the counselors from my high school that I was attending prior to, in my opinion, being abducted and dropped off in the mountains. And I'm not sure if they were, like, because it was a shocker that we recognized each other. We had to downplay the recognition, but also they were very forcible about making sure that our interactions were completely private and unmonitored. And I would just hold it together until we were alone. They made this IQ test. This is the third IQ test I'd ever taken, right? So I know what they entail. They stretched it out so that it was longer. And while we did do everything that they needed to do because it needed to get done, there was also a lot of communication about, like, are you okay? Sorry, I'm in a hybrid, and so my car just started charging itself again. And, like, what's really going on here? Like, what is this program really about? This is what they say goes on. Like, what is your experience? And, they were concerned, which was excellent for me because this is, like, one of the first kind of validating adult perspectives on, like, this kind of a place is a little crazy, right? And then what they even got to sit in on some family topics in my family. It was great. I think they even called me up in front of them. I don't remember if they did. It was super gentle. And anytime that a family was touring, say, to send their kids to the school or visiting their kid prior to whatever, blah, blah, whatever, if there were adults that were not part of the program, they were sent to an appropriate family for an appropriate topic day, and then everything, like, they're only there for one meal, so if they had any, like, serious work they needed to do on someone, they would just postpone that to another table topic, and they would just have, like, the positive, oh, you've come really far shit, for these people to see, so they could see these peers supporting each other's progress and these peers leveling up and the self-confidence, and that compared with what they would make them tell about themselves, this narrative of their identity, you used to be this, you used to be that, and them saying it about themselves in front of these witnesses. Like, it appeared pretty nice. We loved when there were parents in our family. That usually meant that, at least for that meal, even if you were afraid that you were the topic of the day, you were getting off. You were getting a final meal. And then even if something was going on that would otherwise need to be addressed, even if it was addressed, it wasn't going to be addressed on the level that it usually was. Like, they're going to attempt to, like, communicate and reason with you instead of yell at you and berate you, right? Like, same thing, we still want you to do X instead of Y, but we're going to ask you nicely and say we believe in your ability to, like, be a better person or some shit, instead of, like, this is why nobody loves you, this is why you haven't seen your parents in 3 years, this is why you're going to wind up, like, dead on a corner someday kind of shit. So, yeah, that was a lot of fun. But, so, I utilized this time with this outside contact to, like, really just be myself again, feel safe in that. There's a lot of breakdown cry jazz. I told them everything. I was completely honest with them about everything that was going on. And they were so concerned that they commissioned a psychiatrist or psychologist, I'm not sure which. I would love to name him because I'm so grateful for him, but I'm not sure how professional people feel about this stuff, and I guess so I won't. I'll email him. That'd be great. So they sent this psych guy to visit me and to do a psychiatric evaluation based on the claims that these special needs are psych-based, right? Especially since it's not IQ-based, it's not grade-based, like learning-based. This is, I'm not safe unless I'm here, institutionalized. So they send him, and he is a complete angel in my human experience. He's on my, my left-hand top 5 of angelic experiences. This person is completely honest with me. He actually brings me information from Cindy, who he's been having contact with. Because these adults who are actually trained and licensed in mental health all recognized that this child needed some emotional support, needed to know that somebody was still there, and so letting me know that when I left that I would still have somewhere to go and that people still wanted me was a game changer. So just like learning that, you know, my boyfriend, who was like the primary stabilizer, was just gone, you know, like there was no, I don't get a closure, right? He's just, it's over, and that's not real, even though you've been acting as if it were real for this long. Which, you know, as soon as I found that out, I copped to the t-shirt, gave it to my sponsor, and whatever, and I'd become so much more malleable. And now that I have this therapist letting me know that, you know, there are still people who are thinking about me and care about me and want to get me a message and want me to know that they'll be there, it really, that was just, I'm so grateful to him for being that person, because he could have been anybody else and done anything else, and I don't know where the story would go. And he validated my experience that this was like abnormal behavior and it wasn't, you know, psychologically appropriate at all, and that I was normal. And he visited me multiple times, even though, like, he really didn't need to speak to me. Like, the entire purpose from coming all the way from, you know, Connecticut, you know, I think it was like 6 to 8 hours up to Hancock, was to emotionally support me. This kid, he wasn't my therapist. He was just randomly assigned to me, and I hope that maybe this was of interest to him then, and, you know, is of interest to him now, and maybe he can shed some light as someone who's actually visited them like he did. But it was just, you know, like, people have a really hard time with the duality in humanity and the way that we deal with ourselves and each other. But there are some people sometimes that do shit that is just, like, fucking heroic. And just, like, an everyday, we could all do it, but we all don't. And when they do, it means everything. And this doctor doing this for me possibly meant the difference between me, like, attempting suicide, I don't know, or staying in the program and winding up super fucked up in a whole nother flavor of crazy, right? And it meant a lot. And months later, when I did graduate high school from my old public high school, he was there. He was at my graduation, and I don't know if I could ever convey my gratitude or what it meant. I hope I have, and I hope he did understand, because it possibly saved my life. And yeah. Since we touched on some light, why not bring back the darkness? Okay, so, not sure if we'll ever fully paint the picture of the pure on pure psycho shit. Again, like I said, Handmaid's Tale, guys. But, someone who survived the school, but is no longer with us, who I did meet up with after the school, and who was repeatedly blamed, for one of her parents' cancer, I think, and her parents' divorce, and I think she was genuinely bipolar. The whole medication element at the school is fun too. They weren't, you know, for a therapeutic a boarding school that offers like emotional therapy, because they were soliciting people with emotional issues, including ADHD, bipolar disorder, all that shit. I don't think they were properly medicating people at all. At this point, I think I was off Ritalin, but I'm really not sure. I just don't honestly remember. I was at the nurse enough to create a relationship with her, so I don't know what that was about. But Brianna was a specific person of target for her family and for the whole entire family school. There are some people that just got it a lot worse. They were like targets of torture. And so everybody, from their perspective, it was fucking psychotic unless they're just not willing to accept that. If as the least abused I can accept that about my own experience, then everybody who is abused more than myself definitely should be able to. But can we agree, those of us who were there, that certain people, like Brianna, Chris, Tom, and Emil, and stuff like that, for my time period, were specifically targeted. And so they had to deal with a lot more than everybody else. And a weird part about, like, creating this, like, group aggression is maintaining, like, some sort of, like, scapegoat target that's totally safe for everybody to go after. It's really unsafe for me to target you if there's a potential that you will target me back, or that someone like in staff is going to have your back over me, and like, that's just a risk I'm not willing to take. Now, firstly, I'm talking in the, like, the everybody. I did not call fucking people out for shit, because I was not feeding into that at all. But people did, and, Meredith mentioned it in our first episode. In order to get ahead in the program, you do need to not only hold yourself incredibly accountable, to, like, a constant shame base, but, like, also hold other people accountable as part of, like, working your own program and showing your progress, and especially when you are put in a position of leadership, like as a junior sponsor or as an anchor, you are expected to hold your, like, peers who are just a little bit below you in the program, accountable. Now, when you take on people on your own level, it gets freaking dangerous. So these scapegoats are a really important part of allowing people to engage in this behavior safely, to the point where they're really confident in attacking each other publicly. And so people like Brianna, it was totally cool. Like, people were, I think I was there for at least one, were calling her up in her family, even though they weren't in her family. She's getting called out in class all the time. And she's on pretty incredible sanctions. And now, I did not witness the two worst situations with her firsthand, but I have spoken to a couple people who've confirmed that they were true, that were in her family. And things like this were, I don't want to say typical, they're typical. I just don't know to the varying extent of, like, how perverse they were and how completely destructive they were to the psyches of children. But some people are obviously gonna, like, you're talking, like, think about, especially with these dorm situations where all the girls in your dorm, Meredith says there were probably 15 of us in the trailer, all of them sit around and you're in the middle and it's time to call you out and everyone has to air their issues with you. Even if they didn't have them before they sat down, if you're the scapegoat, this is a really safe time for me to, like, participate in the program and really show that I'm learning my shit. Sometimes these were not staff, monitored, and they would use anchors and upper students to monitor it instead. Sometimes they were monitored, especially if it was during standard, like, right before bed dorm time. There was a staff member there until they locked us up. So if it was during that time, then they were there often, not always. So some of them, they're going to range from everyone telling you that you smell, you have BO, and that you're disgusting, and this is why you don't have friends, and that now we're going to, like, watch you shower, and we're going to time you shower, and blah, 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 stuff like that, all the way up to, if you have been expressing your suicidality, or even if you fucking haven't, honestly, but that's one of your things. What if you threaten to drink astringent to poison yourself to get to the hospital? What if you do drink one bottle, but guess what? One bottle's not going to get you there. So maybe these adults round up all the astringent in the school, and in this girl's dorm, they all sit around her and, tell her to chug it, because that's what she wanted to do, right? So fucking do it. And she does. And that's how she winds up getting to the hospital. But it's after this experience of your peers, telling you basically to go ahead and kill yourself. Which I had, as I spoke about earlier, my own similar aspect of that with my own mother. Also, I had a friend who came to live with me when I was around 16, who had serious issues of her own. And I was not emotionally mature enough to deal with it. And when she used the "I'll just go kill myself" guilt trip with me, I was like, fucking go do it, because that was how I felt about everybody trying to manipulate me at the time, and totally not safe, and I was totally not a good friend to her. But, varying levels of that experience, but it's absolutely horrifying. Like, if I were to write this scene out for you and put it in a Netflix original with a bunch of kids, you guys would be nauseated, and I'm not sure if I can get that across verbally. It also went so far as to a cutting circle, where they're peer pressuring someone who has just recently either cut themselves or expressed the eagerness to cut, and they're giving them access to razors and having them do that. So this stuff is fucking sick, and I assure you, whether or not they're ready to deal with it, or, maybe they've, maybe this is something that you can deal with and process and move on. Even the girls in those circles who were part of those, they walked away with some shit. Unfortunately, a lot of the girls or boys, whatever, in the middle of those circles did not walk away at all, or couldn't walk very far after they got out. And this comes back with the causation correlation issue and holding, who is accountable for these suicides that happen at the schools or after the schools. But I assure you, most of them, especially the ones that happen after the schools, participated with Cafferty and the Family Foundation School Truth Campaign, whose website is still active, and you can still read those testimonials, and including Brianna, whom I mentioned. These things did scar them for life. These were things that they had to continue working on after they left. And, I'm dealing with that 15 years later, and again, least abused over here, right? So some of these people, this is just, I really do hope that on some of these extreme elements, which for the record, just to keep it in comparison, the Family Foundation School was tamer than a lot of other programs, including, one of our kind of sister programs, Elon. But also, the family school in the 90s was a much more dangerous, physically aggressive beast than it was in the 2000s. And then after that, there's a whole other transition. So by the time that it's closed down by alumni that advocated and brought it to Congress, and also were able to completely destroy their online reputation by hosting the truth out there, and parents just, who were educating themselves at least, decided not to send their kids there. The enrollment was so down that they couldn't afford to keep it open. But those kids who were there in the final years, I think they kind of did have a little bit of a summer campy experience. The campus now is part of this gorgeous camp, and it is, you take out all of the horrific ghosts that walk among that campus from the psychological torture, and it is a beautiful place. But the kids who were there in the 90s, some of them tried to drown themselves, and I don't know if one did, in the lake. They drowned kittens in front of them in the lake. When we were there, they broke the legs of piglets and kicked them onto the back of a truck, the piglets that they had nursed. There's a lot of that kind of shit going on, and this stuff is really harsh. You have a lot of isolation when I'm there. There was more isolation in the 90s, including them rolling kids up in duct-taped carpets and just leaving them in closets or in the back of a room for days, if not potentially weeks on end. And the physical restraints and the tackling and the throwing them through tables and these big, gigantic men tossing them under their multiple bodies on the floor, while I saw that while I was there, and it still was part of it, apparently it was happening multiple times a day back in the 90s, whereas, there were days in between, at least you personally witnessing a tackle or a restraint or some kid get slammed through a table by an old dude. So, these programs, evolve, especially as all eyes go on them. Once the family school was under investigation by New York State, I assure you, the experience of those kids differs greatly from my own, which differs, again, greatly from the 90s as well as the 80s, right? So that is something that's important to keep in mind. So I just realized that I quite literally spent the entire day sitting in my car smoking a pack of cigarettes and 2 coffees from the time I woke up until now. We'll call today therapy, I guess. There's so much to talk about my experience at the family school, and I'm already at 2 hours, and I'm not sure if anybody's listened this far anyways. Hopefully you, like I, if you're even interested in this podcast in the first place, are into the longer ones that you can use on multiple road trips. So, for the one of you out there, thanks for listening. I guess I should wrap it up. Ultimately, for me, and we'll cover more details and other things, but I did choose to walk on my 18th birthday, and much to my surprise, and again, on my left-hand top 5 most beautiful moments in my entire life, Cindy, the woman who had taken me into her home and into her family, was waiting for me in the parking lot with my best friend, Paul. And they'd been waiting since midnight, just in case, that I'd had the ability to walk at midnight. The school really didn't want, any of the other students to see what was happening. That I was getting a ride home, and that I was really happy, and that it all worked out. I think that would have been, really counterproductive to the progress in their program pushing with other kids. And so they kind of ushered me out immediately after breakfast or during breakfast. I'm really not sure. And I sat down with Sid Parnham, and he apologized to me, told me that they had to believe what my parents had said, in spite of me asking to be drug tested, but, you have to be 18 to be drug tested without your parents' consent, and everything else. He offered to buy me a train ticket or bus ticket or whatever to wherever I needed to go, but wasn't needed because my family was there, your family of choice. And I could write a whole book about how pivotal both of my relationship with Cindy, as, a woman who welcomed me into her home, and my relationship with Paul as, my best friend through high school and for a while after. But let's just say that this was huge. And I ran out of there so fast that I forgot my retainer. So, God, I could have perfect teeth now. But, leaving the school, reality is never what you expect it to be or remember it to be. And, I think that something that's very common for people who leave these programs, whether they graduate or otherwise, is it's kind of difficult to bounce back into society again. I'd had the opportunity to sue my parents for this when I initially got out, and I chose not to. I didn't blame my parents as much as I blamed the school. I did graduate, but I wasn't able to afford college because my parents had continued claiming me on their income taxes, and based on their income, I wasn't eligible for any financial aid, so I took a year off, and because I wasn't in school, and my best friend Paul had gone off to college, I effectively became homeless. I was working, and I was homeless, and hanging out with the wrong crowds, because, they were dealing with the same stuff I was, but also, how could they judge me, right? I had a lot of negative relationships, the kind of relationships I thought I deserved, I became pregnant that first year that I was supposed to be working and saving up for college while on antibiotics, because abstinence-only education does not work. Antibiotics cancel out your birth control, y'all. Very lucky, blessed, and grateful to have my 14-year-old daughter, but that is that. And the long-term effects of coming out of some weird psychological social experiment. I mean, it seems like when you watch the really good documentaries, so watch The Last Stop film, which is about the Elon School, and watch Fix My Kid, which is about straight. It seems to take people, survivors of institutional abuse, especially within the troubled teen industry, on average like a decade and a half to really like relate what they're dealing with to what happened. And, you know, I understand that for some people who just like can't relate at all, that it seems like what we're trying to do is blame this school that was like harsh, or, you know, our parents or someone for something. But the reality is, like, we go almost a decade and a half on average before we're willing to assign any blame outside of ourselves in the first place. Because what we're taught is that we're the cause of everything negative in our lives, that we lie to ourselves so much that we don't know what kind of a liar we are, that we hate ourselves, and that we're setting ourselves up for a life of, you know, complete aloneness, complete devastation until, you know, our life ends from our drug choices or our risky sexual behavior or what have you. And so, like, it's complex. PTSD is complex. And it's a relational disorder. It means that I do see danger everywhere. I have a lot of really, at this stage, ineffective, because they're just inappropriate, coping and defense mechanisms, which mean that I am hypervigilant in social situations. I do believe in the good in humanity, but I understand that everyone's their own devil, and so I don't trust anybody, which, can we agree, makes a lot of sense based on at least, you know, 10 minutes out of what I told you, right? And I, you know, I still don't know how to deal with pure relationships, office environments, groups of girls. These things are really, really hard for me. It sounds like I'm bitching. But they are. You know, in order to protect myself, I've created a whole complex of personality issues, so that I don't have to deal with something I don't feel like I'm able to deal with. And over time, what it's done, instead of me being able to, like, stay super strong and super stoic and controlling in high stress environments, which is part of what I do. I'm excellent in crisis, and I'm shit if I have no crisis, but I will find it for myself so that I can feel stable again. You know, but outside of a genuine crisis, my window of tolerance is shrinking. So, like I said, with the coping mechanisms, the family school is the height of my adaptive ability to survive. Because after that, it's like, as years go by, I can actually tolerate less and less stressors of these specific types, before I'm going to resort to, you know, fight, freeze, flight, fawn, or faint, you know. And so that's what I'm dealing with now, and that's why I'm in therapy, because I got to the point where I was having, I think they're something vagal seizures, whatever they're called. I was having panic attacks that meant I would collapse to the ground, vomit all over myself, and in some cases, you know, seize, burn off like part of my face on the carpet or what have you, if I was lucky to be on a carpet. I had to learn coping mechanisms for those things. Like, I needed to learn when to sit down so that I didn't fall down because I could feel it coming. And these things all hit me in my later 20s, when I was relatively, at least in my own mind, successful. I was working at a tech startup, and also doing a film, and I'd worked for 2 companies that were my dream companies, and I had this whole nonprofit artist revolution shit with my friends, and, you know, all this other jazz going on in New York. And then I'm starting to have these panic attacks, which I did not know what a panic attack was. I didn't. So I genuinely thought that I had like a brain tumor. So originally what I thought it was, when it started to happen, was I thought that I had bad weed the first time. The second time, I thought it was because I'd mixed weed and alcohol and it had caused that. The third time, I realized it was because I got really scared of something, but I figured it was a one-off. And it wasn't until one of my girlfriends who was doing that whole artist shit with me has a panic attack at my friend's apartment, and I see her have a panic attack, and I'm like, oh my God, are you okay, blah, and she's like, yeah, it's cool, I get panic attacks, and I'm like, what the fuck, like, take me to your leader, what are you talking about, and because I'm relating so hard to that, and then I wind up having a miscarriage, which I do not do a DNC, and so hormonally throws me for a fucking loop outside of everything else, when I'm like 28 or something. And luckily, again, this is my blessed, charmed life, y'all. I have friends who are super into self-healing and psychedelics, which I was really, really opposed to. I was opposed to drugs, especially coming out of the family school, although I go through drinking, because, like, fuck it, I'm not an alcoholic, and then later smoked pot. I didn't mess with anything else. Like, I was really, really scared. I had a few experimental nights. Synthetic things didn't work on me, and so I didn't fuck with it. But luckily, I did have these friends, and so psychedelic therapy, initially starting with the DMT experience, really saved my life. It completely changed the trajectory of my life. I was living a very high-stress life in New York, trying to accomplish everything in a moment, and I wound up relocating to a farm in Texas after I started psychedelic therapy, because I realized that the energy that used to feed me was feeding on me, and that I was no match for New York City, and if it wanted to devour me, then by damn it would, you know, and I wasn't ready to be eaten alive by this beast that I was, you know, having this love affair with that was really unhealthy. So this stuff all happens, and then this is when I really start to do some genuine spiritual and personal work and try to become a better person, especially recognizing that most of the personality that I created about myself was completely disingenuous and inauthentic, and most of my relationships were for survival, or I was using someone in some way. I was repeating these narcissistic, codependent relationship dramas with pretty much everyone, and I was really, really unconscious of this for a really long time. And so once I became completely conscious of it, like snapped out of this reality, this is what you're doing, straighten up, I had no other choice. It doesn't mean that there was any sort of easy fix, because we're doing these programs because it has been incredibly rough. The family school made the cover of the New York Times, which forced a lot of us to really face our shit, especially because the comment section was a bunch of victim blaming, which was pretty hard to deal with. Some of our families didn't really know about this jazz, and so it just unlocked a bunch. And so over the past couple years, it's been coming up into the forefront, and some of us are no longer able to pretend like our fancy schmancy boarding school in the gorgeous Catskill Mountains was anything other than a social experiment born out of a narcissistic ego trip that was child abuse at the very least, and a inhumane cult that was completely out of control, where our parents handed us over to child predators, and everybody worked together to attempt to rewrite our identity and the trajectory of our life against our will, where we watched people die, and we've been counting the names since. So, you know, when you bring this stuff to the surface, there's a lot of work to be done. So in that vein, with this having been about my CPTSD journey, I do highly recommend that you, if you are dealing with CPTSD or you have a loved one that is, that you look into some resources that are widely available. So those resources include Dr. Ariel Schwartz's free blog, which covers a ton of background information on CPTSD, or if you are someone with CPTSD, I highly recommend getting her book, The Complex PTSD Workbook. It's on Amazon. I have it as a digital version, which I do not recommend, so much so that I had the gentleman that I do home health for buy a physical copy so that we can play with that one too, because it is a workbook, and I just didn't realize that, if you want to use it as a workbook, then that is, digital wasn't the way for me. But I also have like limited technology, so maybe there are like tablets that make it way easier to be interactive. So Ariel Schwartz is a great resource for complex PTSD. Definitely, just Google, YouTube, just familiarize yourself. What we're talking about is childhood exposure to prolonged stress hormones that create brain damage and personality and relational disorders based on like having like really like, life-saving coping mechanisms then, but that we just refuse to give up now. If you are a survivor of institutional abuse, there are tons of resources for you now. I'm not saying that any of them are going to make this just turn into a success story overnight, because I'm still in it. A lot of us are still in it, but you don't have to be in it alone. There is the Troubled Teen subreddit. There's also a bunch of WASP survivor and Troubled Teen groups on Facebook. You can reach out if you're looking for referral access to either attorneys, especially if you recently got out of a program and anything that qualifies as child abuse happened to you, or, look, there's a list, and I'm not a legal expert, but if you've gotten out within the past few years, I highly recommend that you look into that. And so there are a bunch of websites devoted to. So two of the groups, though, that I personally hang out with in, the virtual survivor national coalition world, where a bunch of us are getting together to do our own projects, support each other's projects, and work on state and national reform legislation and justice. Two of the groups that focus with psychological support and referrals as well as legal are going to be the Survivors of Institutional Abuse, and that's going to be .org. They're going to be able to refer you to some pretty cool attorneys if that's something that you're looking into. But I always highly recommend, and something that they offer as well as Unbroken, which prioritizes this because one of the founders is a mental health professional focused in survivors of institutional abuse, is that if you're going to be calling your old friends from the schools, if you're going to start really listening to these podcasts, watching these documentaries, and maybe even getting involved yourself, is that it's really, really important to create a stable foundation for your mental health. Because even if you're coming into this feeling pretty good and pretty stable and pretty supported, as you face these demons and as you really unlock some stuff that you may have locked up for yourself to protect yourself, and you remember things maybe you don't remember, all of this, like, you really you do need mental health support. So whatever that needs to be for you, whether it is a spiritual or religious confidant, whether it's a licensed mental health provider, and I'm definitely going to recommend someone who is trauma informed and works with CBT, DBT, and potentially EMDR therapies. And if you are, those, both Sia and Unbroken can refer you out, and Unbroken, the co-founder Samantha, who is a mental health professional, offers a sliding scale for survivors of institutional abuse, especially if you don't have insurance, or I'm not sure if she takes it, but just check it out with her. I don't know the details on this jazz. I have a therapist through a grant-funded program here with North Texas Trauma Support, and they're excellent, and I highly recommend that you either find something in your area, reach out to one of these groups for a referral, but that would be a way to go about it. Also, I'm not sure if there are many on-the-ground survivor support groups. These are mostly virtual at this time. If you're in Dallas and you want to meet in person, hit me up. We're not going to, kill each other in a parking lot, but there's actually, 5 of us that I talk with pretty regularly. We could totally go out for some coffee and do jazz like that, and maybe get that started. That's something we'd really, really like to do, especially in Dallas. But also, the films that I mentioned earlier, there are a bunch of films coming out, so get excited. There are a bunch of social projects by these WASP survivors and Suburbia's Dirty Little Secret and Unbroken. Right now, it's hashtag breakingcodesilence. And so this is like a survivor testimonial. A lot of us haven't spoken about this in 15 freaking years. And it's surprisingly, I guess it's not surprising because of the way social media is now, but the people getting out of the schools now are reaching out to the rest of us much sooner than we did. But again, I guess that's, social media is totally different. We didn't even have Facebook when I got out of the family school, right? So that wasn't going to be a way I was going to get connected with others. So I highly recommend you just search the hashtag breakingcodesilence on YouTube, on Facebook. Go to the WASP Survivors website, which is an excellent source of information, especially about WASP and their programs and everything that they were dealing with and are still dealing with today. But if you're comfortable getting involved with that, please do. Also, make sure that you hashtag those or they're the same thing, the iseeyousurvivor iseeyousurvivor campaign, so hashtag iseeyousurvivor. And if you check on YouTube, it's been a while since someone's uploaded an iseeyousurvivor video, so that should happen. I'm the last one. Go check it out. It's horrible. It's me and my super nervous breakdown, and it's not like 70 hours like this is. But, get those testimonials up, whether you are a survivor yourself, if you were a staff member, a parent, what have you. There are parents and educators and family members that did iseeyousurvivor videos over the years, so there's like a lot of perspectives to go on. That campaign was started by a family school alumni. Again, I don't know who wants me to name names, because a lot of these people are still currently involved in some heavy advocacy. They're involved in the documentaries that are coming out. They're involved in the lawsuits that are currently open with the family school and other groups. And so definitely don't want to screw anyone's vibe up. But yeah, check out those social media campaigns. They're super relatable. And then we'd mentioned in the first episode, check out the ABC 2020, A Boy Called Lucas, which is on YouTube and ABC. And so you can check that out. But, as comfortable, dive in. Please figure out something to stabilize yourself, whether it's spiritual or mental health related, because this is a wild fucking ride, and I do appreciate you, spending your entire day or many days on many road trips, tuning in to my self-indulgent, recollection events. But, CPTSD is a really big deal. And it affects our society. It's huge. Definitely, check out your ACE and, reach out if you need some support. And, thanks for listening. Talk to you soon. Welcome back to Troubled, a podcast by survivors of institutional abuse, for survivors, the general public, yada yada. This is part 2 of my story, which started with everything obviously being about the tuna. And I hope that that 2 hours wasn't way too much and enough to keep you from these 2 hours. Obviously, if you're pressing play, you're here, you're in this with me now. But this episode is actually a bit more high tempo. When I listened to all 4 hours of this one day that I sat in my car chugging coffee and chain smoking and making this for you and me, I realized that the caffeine kicks in with these next 2 hours. So it's going to be a bit of a bumpy ride. I just wanted to clarify a few things that I don't feel get clarified in the last episode or in this one as well. The staff at the Family Foundation School are mostly not even teachers. The requirements for them to be staff and leaders at the school really is that they have completed their own program within this variation of Synanon-based AA. So that's really it. It's very possible that there were 1 or 2 that had taught in the outside world, and it's also possible, I don't know, I have no idea. We don't know what their credentials were, but for the majority, the staff that taught us and that, chased and restrained and all this jazz, these are just everyday members of this Synanon-based AA cult that have graduated the program and that are adults, or children of those members came in as well. So I just wanted to put that out there so that you don't think we're actually being taught by teachers or anything. Okay, thanks guys. Let's continue.